Twilight settles over Windsor Great Park with a muted heaviness, drawing a soft line between the fading sky and the half-lit silhouette of Royal Lodge. From a distance, the house appears serene, almost timeless, the sort of residence that suggests continuity rather than complication. Yet within that tranquil façade lies one of the most unusual arrangements in modern royal life, a partnership shaped as much by consequence as by companionship. For more than 20 years, Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew have shared this home long after their marriage formally ended. The arrangement has puzzled observers and fascinated the public, not because it is dramatic, but because it quietly defies the expectations attached to royal separation. Divorced, often scrutinised and repeatedly tested by public opinion, they have nonetheless remained unwavering in a loyalty that does not fit neatly into conventional categories. Royal Lodge itself embodies the contradiction. Steeped in privilege, yet shadowed by financial strain, it stands as both symbol and sanctuary. A residence granted through heritage, yet sustained through effort. A domestic space shaped not by ceremony, but by the steady rhythm of two people who have known each other's triumphs and missteps long before headlines began to define them. As we step inside this story, we ask why their bond persisted when so many others fractured under much lighter pressure. What made this particular partnership endure? And why did Royal Lodge, of all the royal properties that mark the Windsor landscape, become the quiet stage upon which their shared life unfolded? Some houses hide history in their walls. Royal Lodge hides an understanding. In the years after her separation, Sarah Ferguson found herself navigating a landscape with no clear map. She was no longer an active member of the royal family, yet her name still echoed in the public imagination, a reminder of past headlines, past affection, and past controversy. The transition from Duchess to independent public figure was never straightforward, but it was marked by a quiet determination that would become the hallmark of her reinvention. She began, quite simply, by working. Books appeared, children's stories, autobiographical reflections, wellness guides, each one shaped by a voice that tried to blend candour with encouragement. She became a regular presence on television, offering warmth in settings where familiarity mattered more than formality. Reports suggest that production teams appreciated her openness, her ability to speak without pretense, and her willingness to show vulnerability where others might have hidden behind polish. Yet even as audiences warmed to her, a certain question lingered around her every appearance. Was she rebuilding a public identity or repairing the consequences of the past? Charity work became a steady thread. Statements from foundations she partnered with often praised her energy, her visibility, and her instinct to connect with people on level ground. She used her platform to support health initiatives, children's programs, and humanitarian causes that allowed her to speak with purpose rather than performance. But the shadows of previous financial difficulties and personal misjudgments often followed close behind, casting an uneven light on efforts that were, by most accounts, sincere. Throughout these changing roles, Royal Lodge remained her fixed point, a home that did not demand perfection, only presence. Here, far from the cameras, she raised two daughters whose lives grew into the modern fabric of the royal family. Observers noted that the warmth of the household contrasted starkly with the turbulence of her public reputation. Within those walls, she found the steadiness she struggled to cultivate elsewhere. Her relationship with Prince Andrew also shifted into something unclassified, yet enduring. No longer bound by marriage, the two fashioned a companionship that defied the usual post-divorce narrative. They shared responsibilities, routines, and, according to those familiar with the arrangement, a mutual loyalty that was often misunderstood from the outside. For some, this showed resilience. For others, it raised questions about dependence and identity. Royal Lodge became the quiet symbol of that ambiguity. It was not just the setting of her reinvention, but the structure that allowed it. A place she returned to when the public reception wavered, a sanctuary where confidence could be rebuilt in increments rather than declarations. And so, her middle years settled into a delicate balance, striving outwardly to redefine herself while privately leaning on the familiar anchor that had never quite let her go. Rain settles gently on the stone steps of Royal Lodge, softening their outline until they appear almost part of the landscape. It is a quiet image, unremarkable at first glance, yet it mirrors the atmosphere that often surrounds life within the house, calm on the surface, with a steady undercurrent of pressure beneath. For all its grandeur, Royal Lodge came with responsibilities that reached far beyond its picturesque facade. Maintaining a residence of this scale was not simply a matter of heritage. It required continuous resources, planning, and financial resilience. Reports over the years suggest that the cost of upkeep, renovation commitments, and practical running expenses shaped the private lives of both Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew more firmly than they ever stated publicly. While the property stood as a symbol of continuity, the reality of preserving it demanded choices that were rarely visible to the outside world. Their changing roles within the royal family added further complexity. As public duties reduced and formal support structures evolved, both found themselves adjusting to a new financial landscape. Visibility diminished, public engagements shifted, and the stability once provided by clear institutional roles became less certain. These were not dramatic developments, but they created a persistent atmosphere of negotiation, the kind that influences daily decisions, long-term planning, and the emotional tone of a shared household. Living together after divorce brought its own intricacies. According to acquaintances quoted over the years, the arrangement offered familiarity and mutual support, yet it also required a delicate balance of boundaries and compromises. Practicality played a part, from managing household operations to coordinating responsibilities, but so too did the emotional history that tied them together. Royal Lodge became both refuge and reminder, a place that offered comfort while also reflecting the weight of shared pasts. Loyalty, for Fergie, carried its own hidden cost. As Prince Andrew faced growing public scrutiny in later years, her continued presence at Royal Lodge drew attention once more. Observers noted that her steadfast support appeared grounded in long-standing trust and the desire to maintain stability for their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Yet this same closeness occasionally placed her in challenging positions, inviting questions she had not sought and complicating efforts to sustain her own carefully rebuilt image. In this context, Royal Lodge stands as more than a residence. It represents the balance they continually attempted to maintain, a structure upheld through effort, quiet compromise, and an acceptance that some arrangements endure not because they are simple, but because they are necessary. Behind its muted interiors and half-drawn curtains, the weight of those choices was felt every day, shaping a life that appeared composed from the outside, yet was continually negotiated within. Morning papers land on London doorsteps with the dull thud of inevitability, their headlines softened by a veil of rain. For years, Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew had lived within a fragile equilibrium, a rhythm of routine at Royal Lodge that shielded them to some degree from the harsher edges of public attention. But every royal story reaches a point where private pressures meet public consequence, and for both of them, that moment arrived with little room to retreat. For Fergie, the renewed scrutiny was not unfamiliar. Reports of financial disputes and misjudgments resurfaced periodically, each one reopening conversations she had spent years trying to move beyond. These were not new revelations so much as reminders that reinvention carries its own weight, and that past complexities seldom vanish entirely. Observers noted that despite her efforts, such episodes inevitably shaped the narrative surrounding her, shifting focus from her charitable initiatives to the vulnerabilities that had shadowed her earlier life. For Andrew, the developments were more severe and more irreversible. A series of events in his public life, widely covered and discussed across global media, led to unprecedented consequences. Formal ties were stepped back from, official roles reconfigured, and statements from Buckingham Palace signalled a deliberate and necessary distancing. The tone surrounding him changed sharply. Where ambiguity once existed, accountability now dominated the conversation. The shift was sober, historic, and without precedent in the modern royal era. In that climate, Royal Lodge, once a quiet constant, became part of the story. Questions emerged about its future, its optics, and its symbolism. Commentators wondered how a residence tied to tradition should be managed at a time when the monarchy was striving to project clarity, stability, and a streamlined public identity. King Charles III, according to reports, took steps to modernise operational expectations, reduce potential points of public strain, and reinforce the sense of responsibility attached to royal properties. The scrutiny did not centre solely on bricks and mortar. It centred on what the arrangement represented. Two divorced figures, one facing profound public consequences, continuing to share a residence that held both privilege and history. The quiet arrangement that had endured for decades suddenly appeared exposed, examined through a sharper lens than either had anticipated. This was not a dramatic collapse, but a shift in tone, a widening of the gap between private intention and public interpretation. The balance that had long sustained life at Royal Lodge began to feel less certain, edged by pressures that could no longer be softened by routine or familiarity. As rain traced slow paths across folded newspapers, the realisation settled gently in the background. The equilibrium surrounding Royal Lodge would not emerge unchanged from the events, unfolding beyond its gates. Late afternoon light drifts across the Long Walk at Windsor, settling into the soft haze of a landscape that has watched generations adjust to changing times. In that muted calm, the story of Royal Lodge enters a new phase, one shaped not by ceremony, but by consequence. What had long been a private arrangement now carried the weight of public expectation, institutional reform, and shifting royal priorities. In the months following heightened scrutiny, the future of the property became a subject of speculation and debate. Reports circulated about potential relocations and reconsiderations of long-term leases, though little was confirmed officially. The discussion itself signalled a turning point. Royal Lodge was no longer viewed solely as a family home. It had become a symbol in a broader conversation about the monarchy's responsibilities, its evolving image, and the ways in which royal residences must adapt to public sentiment in a more transparent era. For Sarah Ferguson, this atmosphere required quiet resilience. She continued her charitable commitments, writing projects, and the rhythms of family life, even as the space around her grew more complex. Observers noted that her public presence softened during this time. Fewer appearances, fewer interviews, a gentler step back from the foreground. Yet her role at Royal Lodge remained steady. She provided continuity for her daughters and maintained the familiar routines that had anchored the household for decades. In doing so, she carried much of the emotional labour of preserving a sense of normality. For Prince Andrew, the ramifications were more direct. His public duties had already altered significantly, and the aftermath brought a further contraction of visibility and influence. Statements issued on his behalf emphasised cooperation and withdrawal from public life, underscoring a reality in which the boundaries of his role were redrawn with unusual clarity. The stability of Royal Lodge, once a refuge, now sat within a more uncertain framework, one shaped by external pressures as much as personal circumstance. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie navigated this period with quiet composure. They continued their own careers, charitable involvement, and personal lives, maintaining a relationship with their parents while avoiding the turbulence of commentary surrounding Royal Lodge. Their dignity offered a counterpoint to the noise, a reminder that behind every public narrative, there are individuals simply trying to preserve the integrity of their family. In this aftermath, Royal Lodge gained a new symbolic resonance. It became the site of a family adapting to forces they could neither predict nor fully control. The memories held within its rooms, of childhood, recovery, and domestic ritual, now coexisted with the uncertainties of a changing royal landscape. A chapter was closing, but its successor had not yet revealed itself. And so, life at Royal Lodge continued, steady but subdued, shaped by resilience on the inside and questions on the outside. In the softened glow of a candlelit corridor, Royal Lodge feels momentarily suspended in time. Its walls have witnessed decades of change, personal, public, and political, yet they hold a stillness that suggests something more enduring than circumstance. When we step back from the events that shaped this story, a clearer picture emerges. The narrative was never only about a residence, or even about reputation. It was about a partnership that refused to be neatly categorised. Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew have lived through the full arc of public favour and public doubt. Yet their bond, unconventional and often questioned, has remained a quiet constant. It sits outside the usual explanations offered for royal life, anchored not in status or strategy, but in the familiarity of two people who have weathered more together than apart. Observers may debate its logic, but its longevity speaks to a human truth. Companionship does not always follow the path that reputation dictates. In that sense, Royal Lodge becomes more than a setting. It is the physical embodiment of a relationship shaped by shared memory, a place that held their daughters' childhoods, their recoveries from public turbulence, and the routines that fostered a sense of normality amid shifting royal landscapes. Its significance lies not only in heritage, but in the quiet understanding that settled within its rooms long after public approval faded. And yet, the future of the lodge reflects the wider questions facing the modern monarchy. In an era defined by scrutiny, transparency, and a desire for institutional clarity, the existence of such a private arrangement invites reflection on how tradition adapts and what must be relinquished in order to survive. How does a family navigate their history when the expectations of the present grow more exacting? And what becomes of a home built on continuity when that continuity is itself under review? As the candle flame wavers and the camera draws back, we are left not with judgment, but with contemplation. The story of Royal Lodge is, at its heart, a story of loyalty. Complicated, imperfect, and undeniably human. A reminder that behind titles and timelines, some bonds endure simply because time has made them inseparable.